Good afternoon. The subcommittee will come to order. Members present will be permitted to submit written statements to be included in the official hearing record. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 5 calendar days to allow statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. Today marks my final hearing as chairman of this important subcommittee. It's truly an honor to have served on this subcommittee with my fellow distinguished members. My time as chairman, focused on the world's most dynamic region, has been punctuated with memories of meeting countless dedicated policy and business professionals, insights that I'll carry with me beyond my tenure here on the Hill. Did I say grave? And hopefully a lasting mark on our nation's Asia policy. As the United States undergoes a notable transition, I convened this hearing to review the current administration's policy toward Asia and to determine what tangible accomplishments the United States has made. More importantly, we will also form suggestions for the new administration's policy towards Asia. We've come to the end of an administration whose signature foreign policy initiative has been a rebalance to the Asia-Pacific. I have long championed enhancing our engagement with Asia-Pacific and our friends and our allies in the region. They have welcomed the rebalance as a strengthening of our regional relationships. But after 8 years of enhancing U.S. efforts in Asia, serious challenges to U.S. interests persist, and some of them have even grown. Today, I note that our posture in Asia is not what we hoped for when the pivot was introduced. TPP. As we reflect on the outgoing Obama administration's efforts in Asia, the Trans-Pacific Partnership may end up being the administration's most lasting failure. The administration chose to use this economic agreement as our strategic anchor in Asia and tried to market the deal at home, saying that it would allow us to write the rules for free trade. Now the prospect of TPP ratification in the United States is effectively dead, and our closest Asian partners are questioning the endurance of our leadership in the region. This debacle endangers U.S. prestige in Asia, and it didn't need to happen. The administration's own arguments implied that China is now in a position to write the rules, and our national reputation has taken a hit because the administration tied it to TPP without first establishing a national consensus and addressing deep domestic concerns about the potential impact on our economic viability. As the next administration considers its economic and trade ties with Asia, it may now be better to approach negotiations bilaterally, perhaps starting with Japan. If we begin the bilateral process with Japan, we may be able to add other modern economies to the dialogue in a more feasible approach directed at a core group. Without a concerted economic engagement with all parts of Asia, China will fill the void with its willingness to fund much-needed infrastructure without regard to intellectual property, labor, and environmental standards. China has been and will continue to be a land of contradictions, of challenges and opportunities. The need to strike a proper balance of working together on economic prosperity, but with a willingness to stand firm when necessary, will continue under our President-elect's tenure. Our business community and economy are under threat from regulations and policies designed to favor Chinese interests and domestic champions. Threats from cyber-enabled economic espionage and intellectual property theft continue unabated. The current administration has been more willing to make concessions and seems fearful of provoking China. I've been alarmed to witness the escalation of infringement on Hong Kong's self-governance and basic law with little to no U.S. pushback. Many in Congress have been similarly unsatisfied with the administration's half-hearted efforts to address Chinese human rights abuses and regional aggression, particularly with respect to the South China Sea. Our regional allies and friends continue to call for further U.S. engagement and assistance, and it's my expectation that the next administration will seek to provide substantive reassurance to the region. Taiwan. A lot of hoopla about Taiwan in the last few days. China's also been increasingly unreasonable towards Taiwan, which is in a more precarious position than ever. I was able to attend Tsai Ing-wen's swearing in. That was the third president of Taiwan that I've been able to attend a swearing in. I attended Lee Teng-hui's, first freely elected president of Taiwan. I then attended Chen Shui-bian's, and I was able to be at Tsai Ing-wen's, much over the objections of some of the folks here. I was, I think, the highest ranking member of the Congress to, actually, I think it was the only member of the Congress that attended. After completing yet another successful democratic transition, Taiwan continues to prove that a free, flourishing, economically successful Chinese democracy and civil society is possible. The surprise over President-elect Trump accepting a call from President Tsai Ing-wen has been an unnecessary distraction. The fact is, we are economically and militarily engaged with Taiwan, as directed by the 1971 Taiwan Relations Act, and a phone call between principals should not garner such outrage. I'm further dismayed that the same Washington elites and press corps that hailed President Obama a hero for meeting with Iran President Rouhani, a key supporter of terrorism across the globe, would become so distraught over a phone call. I fully expect that President-elect Trump and President Tsai will have a productive relationship that benefits both of our economies. North Korea will continue to be a challenge that we must face head-on. This has been one of the ultimate blunders of the Obama administration in Asia, the so-called strategic patience approach to North Korea. While Kim Jong-un has conducted increasingly powerful nuclear and ballistic missile tests, we've not seen anything that could be described as strategy. If the past is any indication of what to expect, then North Korea could soon conduct another substantial provocation to welcome the new U.S. president to office. Congress has been vigilant about applying pressure on the DPRK, and I anticipate that it will continue to look forward to new levers to stop North Korea's belligerent and dangerous behavior. Sanctions efforts led by Chairman Ed Royce have helped squeeze the DPRK from vital funding sources. Still, more can and has to be done, such as further cooperation and intelligence sharing between our allies, the Republic of Korea and Japan. In addition, more can be done to increase the flow of information into North Korea. We can do much more to assist the people of North Korea to understand the truth of their reality. North Korean provocation should always be met with resistance, and I look forward to a new strategy on this front. This year, the administration's relationship with a longtime ally fell apart. The Philippines, under the direction of a newly elected President Duterte, came out strongly in opposition to the United States. He's appeared to use the media to pit the United States against China in an effort to renegotiate the long-standing alliance structure. Despite the trend of late, I'm heartened to see that the Philippines President and President-elect Trump have shown each other mutual respect, and I'm hopeful that this pivotal alliance will be rekindled from the top down and remain the force for good that it can be. India. The administration has half-heartedly sought to include India in its pivot, but the deep well of potential in our bilateral ties remains untapped. India struggles with infrastructure challenges, energy issues, and difficult neighbors. But the two world's largest democracies are natural partners. There's a strong appetite within the United States to encourage India to take a stronger leadership role within the region. But leadership does come with responsibilities. As India seeks to garner closer commercial and defense relations with the U.S., it must take steps toward important reforms that will lay the foundation for increased ties. I'm skeptical that our interests in Asia have been substantially advanced over the last 8 years. The outgoing administration spoke often of intentions to refocus its efforts in Asia, but left nearly everything undone. Its landmark trade deal has failed. Being patient with North Korea has made us less secure. We've lost footing with a longtime ally in the Philippines, and our security guarantees in the region have been called into question by destabilizing actors. Looking ahead, I am very optimistic that the new administration, along with what I hope will be a unified Congress, can rebuild efforts in Asia, provide for a robust regional security, and promote lasting U.S. prosperity. And I'm going to turn to the gentleman from California, Mr. Barrett, to see if you'd like to make an opening comment or two.
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take this opportunity to just thank you for your work over these last 2 years. your leadership, your understanding of the region, your fluency in the Chinese language. Has been great, and it's been a pleasure to travel to India, to China, and to Taiwan with you. So we're going to miss that expertise, and we're going to miss that leadership, and it really has been a pleasure for this member of Congress serving with you, and I look forward to, hopefully you'll stay engaged in the region if opportunities present themselves to continue to stay engaged, but the best of luck in the future, and I do hope to continue working with you in that. I will leave my further statements for the hearing, so thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the other gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrbacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me just note what a honor and a pleasure it's been to work with you as friends and colleagues and patriots trying to do what's best for our country, and you will be missed, and we hope that things go well. But let me just say, we all are here for a short period of time. Our goal has been to help make things better for the United States of America. Some people think our goal is to focus on making it a better world. That certainly is something positive, and that's frankly, perceptions of what's good for the whole world is not necessarily what's good for the United States of America. And we now have a new president who's made it very clear that will be his criteria. What is good for the people of the United States of America? In that regard, I would suggest that in your area, you have so ably overseen in these last few years, that I would give the Clinton administration a D. I wouldn't give them an F, but I give them a D. And as the chairman just noted, what's going on with actions and hostile posturing and belligerency on the part of China has increased. North Korea's threatening behavior, as well as its actual arrogance in dealing with the issue of nuclear weapons, again, much more threatening than it was. And then we have the crumbling of our long-term relationships with Malaysia and with the Philippines. This overall, then, this pivot to Asia, that's been in and of itself has been a failure, but overall I'll give the administration a D. And looking forward to hopefully next year we can, whoever, even on the other side of the aisle, if they want to give it a rank, that maybe we'll have an A. Let's see if we can all work for that.
Chair recognizes the former chairman of this subcommittee, Mr. Shabbat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin again by, as some of my colleagues have said, thanking you for your years of service to this House, and especially for your stewardship of this committee. And I know you know that you had big shoes to fill in stepping into this role. They were mine, no, but but you handled it very, very well, and you've done a great job as chair of this committee. So I want to thank you for that. And we wish you the best of luck. I'm sure you're going to be very successful in whatever it is. Have you decided yet, or are you going to make an announcement here today, or?
I don't know. I was going to maybe try to be Secretary General of the UN. What do you think?
Would you want that job?
Not on your life.
Let's see what we can do.
But Secretary of State Rohrbacher. Huh? But in any event, the pivot, getting to the topic at hand here, I think has been one of the most frequently and poorly defined phrases of the Obama administration. Some experts have argued that it's been little more than an empty slogan. I hate to say that I tend to agree with that. The pivot, it's really been a sorry excuse for a strategy. It's merely been a hodgepodge of contradictory ideas that's without question signaled indecision and weakness to challengers from Beijing to Pyongyang to Moscow. The past several years have been especially disconcerting, particularly the administration's handling of China's growing assertiveness, from building islands to now militarizing them. We failed to effectively stand up for our allies in the region, such as Taiwan, And I have to say, although I know some folks have been concerned about that, upset about that, I say more power to him for having taken that call. The Chinese bullying has to stop, and it's gotten worse and worse in recent years, and I think this administration has done little to push back on that, and I don't think you reward bad behavior, and I think that's what's been happening. Beijing's behavior has been more and more reprehensible, and there's been not nearly enough pushback, and so I, as I'm sure all my colleagues believe, we don't want to see any sort of military action in that part of the region, but as Ronald Reagan believed, it's through strength that you continue with the peace. Weakness invites military action and war, and I think that's what's happening now. And so I commend President-elect Trump for taking that call. I look forward to hearing the witnesses' testimony here this afternoon, and I yield back.
Thank you. Did any of the other committee members wish to make an opening statement? If not, then we go to the panel. We're really thankful to be joined today by Dr. Richard Ellings, President of the National Bureau of Asian Research. Great to see you again. How's your wounds from your baseball tournament? You doing better? All right. Well, I'm glad to see you. Dr. Derek Scissors, resident scholar. No injuries? Okay, good. I don't think you'd tell us if you did. Ms. Kelly Curie, Senior Fellow at Project 2049 Institute. Great to see you again. And Mr. Barry Lynn, Director of New America's Open Markets Program. And we thank the panel for joining us today to share their experience and expertise. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Ellings. Would you go ahead and turn your microphone on? And you all know the drill. When it turns amber, it's time to wrap up. I think you got about a minute to wrap up. I don't have a heavy gavel, but we don't have the power of the filibuster over here in the House, so you can't go on forever. So that's the drill. Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Ellings.
Chairman Salmon, Congressman Berra, when he gets here, Ranking Member Sherman, and other extraordinarily distinguished members of the committee. It's an honor to share my personal observations and views that are outlined in my written testimony. I plan to get through them quickly before they become obsolete. There might be a tweet. The pivot, better called the rebalance, has been a policy of what might be termed enhanced more of the same. I'll make two contextual points, then assess the policy, and conclude by suggesting some concrete things Congress can do working with the new administration. First, contextual points. For many reasons, this period in history appears to be a hinge moment, as someone put it recently. It's akin in too many ways to the years immediately preceding World Wars I and II, highlighted by the industrialization and rise of dissatisfied, nationalistic authoritarian powers. And yet it differs from these eras in noteworthy ways as well. The nuances of this century's principal rising power, China, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and America's strategic engagement. The remarkable rise, power, and ambitions of China comprise the central issue. As China watchers like to point out, the country has made enormous progress but has all kinds of horrible problems. Its chief problem is that its unelected leadership under Xi Jinping is insecure and resorting to tighter control, repressive measures, and nationalistic appeals to bolster its popularity, capitalizing on historic grievances. Correspondingly, its foreign policies have become more aggressive and at the same time remain carefully calculated and frankly farsighted. China has a grand strategy to maximize its wealth, space, and global influence, and to marginalize its most serious competitors, most notably the United States. It has an eye for weak spots. For many years, specialists have been predicting political crisis or change in China. They have been wrong, and yet they are right about the future. But we have no ability now to predict when change will happen or what kind of change. Second contextual point. Viewed from a global perspective, power, no matter how you measure it, is concentrated heavily in the Asia-Pacific. I characterize the balance of the region as skewed multipolarity. It's skewed in part because China has led a one-sided arms buildup. Given the uneven dispersion of power, the extraordinary pace of change in the balance of power, uncertainty in key countries, and increasing questions about U.S. leadership, ambiguity also describes the strategic environment. Ambiguity is not good. When nations have a difficult time understanding their strategic environments, Many feel insecure and look to expand their allies and defenses. Some nations see opportunities to pursue ambitions. In times like ours, nations are more prone to making calculations that lead to conflict. Our capacities to remain strong and committed, to exploit weaknesses in our competitors, and to form and sustain effective coalitions will be the tests of our leadership. A quick assessment of the pivot. The intention to place greater policy focus on the Asia-Pacific is great. It's terrific, imperative, and goes back decades to the Clinton through George W. Bush administrations. President Barack Obama's high-profile pivot in fall 2011 aimed to strengthen our alliances and friendships, engage China, bolster regional multilateral institutions, expand trade and investment, add to our military presence, at least implicitly, end North Korea's nuclear program, advance democracy and human rights, a packed and familiar agenda, but announced at full volume and short on specifics. After 5 years, it is fair to judge the policy. Notwithstanding a senior State Department official's recent statement that, and I quote, "We are handing the next administration a success story in Asia," seriously, that was said, the pivot and its predecessor policies on balance have failed to prepare us for the challenges of today, let alone tomorrow. We have not been operating from an understanding of the world as it actually exists. We have failed repeatedly to understand and anticipate Russian intentions in policy, North Korean intentions in policy, and most importantly, Chinese intentions in policy. Furthermore, I see no evidence that we have contemplated strategies to avoid facing some type of Sino-Russian or Sino-Russian, North Korean, Pakistani coalition if, for example, hostilities were to break out in the Korean Peninsula and in South Asia. We are being compelled to position our world-leading military forces farther and farther off the Asian coastline. We have not come up with an effective answer to China's island-based building in the South China Sea. We failed to prevent North Korea from achieving nuclear breakout. Sequestration has prevented us from investing in many of the systems we'll need to deter, and if deterrence fails, to win a future conflict in the region. In fact, we do not have a military strategy for the Asia-Pacific. We continue to treat trade with China as normal when the country is persistently mercantilist. U.S. companies are increasingly twisted into pretzels, trying to operate in a market that is now the size of America's. Companies try to avoid upsetting the regime. They try to protect their IP unsuccessfully, and they compete with increasingly strong Chinese companies that are favored in myriad, mostly opaque ways. Our regional leadership is weaker in part due to the apparent demise of the pivot's economic centerpiece, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. According to a smug China Daily article published days ago with regard to trade, quote, "China is happy to write the rules with all its partners." Any further faltering of our commitment to rebalancing would jeopardize, just to name one important example, our strategic relationship with India. The hope for political liberalization of China has not developed from its accession to the World Trade Organization or from the world otherwise engaging China. Indeed, by most measures, the regime is less liberal, more repressive today than any time since it joined the WTO. I'd like to go, when it's possible, when you think it's reasonable, through a number of specific suggestions that answer each one of these issues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellings. Dr. Scissors, thank you. I understand this is your second time testifying before the panel. Thanks for not letting us scare you off from the first time. We're really thrilled to have you here again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I enjoyed the first time, and I hope I will enjoy the second time. Thank you to the committee for having me a second time. My remarks are going to be restricted to economics, which is, of course, important in our engagement in the region, but is only a partial view. I want to state that at the outset. On the economic view, the next administration, the Trump administration, can do much better than the Obama administration did. However, that isn't going to be easy. We are caught between, on one hand, a China that is engaged in predatory trade that harms the United States, and American commitments to open markets and competition that help the United States. And while there is plenty of scope for U.S. improvement, that does not mean we will be able to carry it out. So I will try to address the future more than the past. In terms of addressing the past, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is the obvious issue on the economic side. I have an odd view in America today, which is I didn't like the treaty because it didn't liberalize enough, not because it was too radical and too pro-market. I was at the Heritage Foundation for 5 years, and at that time I wrote multiple pieces praising the idea of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and praising the Obama administration for initiating it. I thought it was a great idea. When I saw the text in November of last year, I changed my mind because I actually read the agreement, which a lot of people don't do, if I may say under my breath. Oh, there's a microphone on, sorry. It did not create the opportunities for American workers that all of us, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, we want. In particular, the U.S. is the most comprehensive services exporter in the world, and there are too many exceptions in liberalizing services trade. And as a result, I, the International Trade Commission, others do not see gains for the U.S. from services liberalization and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I won't spend a lot of time. The point is the TPP doesn't do what we need it to do economically. That's why President Obama began to start talking about writing the rules instead of economic benefits. He started talking about the diplomatic case for TPP. It's all true. But the number one role of a trade agreement is to bring economic benefits through trade. And the TPP does not do that. So I will not be sorry to see it go. So that's one point. But turning in the other direction, something that I'm worried about, I've written about, I wrote in my written testimony, I don't want the United States to swing all the way to the side of being protectionist. The Trump campaign cited a think tank that represents the labor movement talking about how the trade deficit costs U.S. jobs. That's not true. We ran trade surpluses during the Depression. It did not help us on the job front. Our trade deficit plunged in 2009. It did not help us on the job front. Logically, when we are rich, we buy more in the way of imports, and when we are poor, we don't. If you force the trade deficit down, and my colleagues may talk about this, you're going to hurt America's rivals. It's true. You're also going to hurt America's friends and allies because we trade with them and they're involved in supply chains. You're going to damage the global economic system. So I'm going to talk about in a second about sanctions against China because I think there are some that are necessary. I don't want us to go too far to become a protectionist country where we think trade balance is a good economic goal because it isn't. Let's talk about sanctions and China. We can label China a currency manipulator. It is a currency manipulator, so it's a good label. It won't actually bring back U.S. jobs because when you try to connect China's currency value to U.S. jobs, you don't get a connection. Where we know the Chinese are harming us is blocking our exports. When Americans get cheap imports, at least we get a benefit from buying the cheap imports. It helps our consumers. When the Chinese or other countries block our exports, there's nothing for us but cost. And China does that. It's the largest trading country in the world, so it's more important than China does it when Bolivia does it, for example. And they protect their state-owned enterprises from competition, and that is a serious barrier to U.S. exports, in particular U.S. services exports. Reciprocity is a legitimate idea and response. We shouldn't be narrow-minded about it. We shouldn't be protectionist about it, but we should say, you're going to block our trade. We don't have an obligation to allow all your trade to occur. Another issue that we're all familiar with is IP theft. China is the biggest stealer of intellectual property in the world. Tens of millions of Americans have jobs supported by intellectual property. It's not just about high technology. It's about any innovation. We need to act against companies that have received stolen intellectual property. Not just the thieves, which the Obama administration did in a small way, but the companies that have benefited and compete against American companies because they've taken stolen intellectual property from whoever who stole it. That's a sanction that needs to go forward. Something that I know you all have been discussing and will be discussed in the next Congress is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Chinese investment in the United States generally is beneficial, but there are some sectors where we do not want Chinese investment. And so, without getting into the CFIUS debate, I would say that assigning more resources to reviewing investment is a benefit for the United States, both economically and in terms of national security. I'm already being warned, but I do want to talk a little bit about positive steps, not just sanctions against China. I welcomed the phone call, but I welcomed it for a very particular economic reason. I think the U.S. could sign an FTA with Taiwan during this administration, and I think that would be a good idea. Japan, as the chairman mentioned, is a superb goal, much more complicated, much more difficult, harder politically. Taiwan has 23 million people. They're not going to steal American jobs. So we have an advantage in talking to Taiwan. There are countries, India, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam. These are very rapid growth countries. I would not call for FTAs with these countries. They aren't ready, and we aren't ready. But trying to improve trade relations with these countries would bring economic benefits to the United States. They're the important countries in the region to focus on economically. And my last point before I stop, we don't normally think of corporate tax reform as bearing on the Asia Pacific. But in this case, there are plans in the works that have border tax adjustments. And those border tax adjustments will affect our trade with the Asia Pacific. They will affect our partners. Our partners will want to know what's going on. They'll want some input, even though this is a domestic American issue. We can have pro-competitive, wonderfully beneficial U.S. corporate tax reform. I actually think that this committee and people interested in the Asia Pacific should be part of that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Curie, you're also back for a second time, so welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also want to echo the plaudits of your colleagues and your leadership of this committee, subcommittee, and note that you will be missed and your leadership will be missed. And thank you to all the members of the committee. I do want to submit my written testimony for the record, and with one small correction that I have already noted to your staff. The views that I'm presenting today are my own and not necessarily those of Project 2049 Institute or its other scholars, but I'm nonetheless grateful for the opportunity to share them with you today. Since Donald Trump's election victory last month, there has been a great deal of commentary on the future of the Obama administration's pivot to Asia. While the focus on the degree to which the pivot will continue under Donald Trump is important, much of this discussion has tended to focus on hand-wringing about President-elect Trump while ignoring the serious deficiencies of the Obama administration's policies, both in terms of the conceptual failures and the failures of implementation. The whole furor around the call nicely highlighted one of the most serious conceptual weaknesses of the pivot: the failure to link intensified engagement in the Asia-Pacific with fundamental principles that historically have undergirded successful U.S. foreign policy for decades. These principles include privileging relationships with those countries that share our fundamental values, basing policy decisions on the way the world is, not how we wish it would be, operating based on an understanding and appreciation of both the importance and the limits of U.S. leadership, and making sure U.S. commitments are backed up with seriousness of purpose and the resources necessary to reassure partners. The Obama administration was intermittent at best in its adherence to these principles in Asia, and this inconsistency was tantamount to abandonment for those who rely on American strength and those who seek to undermine it. Asia's undemocratic leaders seemed to understand the opportunities created by the gap between rhetoric and reality and showed a consistent willingness to step into and exploit that gap for their own gain. Looking around the region, it's hard to argue that, on balance, there has been an improvement in terms of human rights and democracy, the subject that I've been asked to speak to on today's hearing. In particular, in the past 6 years since the Obama administration launched the rebalance, China's party state has embarked on the most extensive campaign of repression since the Cultural Revolution and has firmly closed the door on any prospect of political liberalization under CCP rule. Even in the Obama administration's poster child for the pivot, Burma, the Tatmadaw appears to be engaging in ethnic cleansing in Rakhine State while simultaneously intensifying attacks on communities in Kachin and Shan states. Meanwhile, the Obama administration, having given away all potential leverage by prematurely lifting sanctions on the military, watches helplessly as Aung San Suu Kyi struggles with an unreconstructed Tatmadaw that has retained control over the key levers of power in the country. And I want to note Mr. Shabbat's excellent work on Burma and hope that that will continue going forward. As the Obama administration drops serious U.S. commitments to support human rights and democracy across Asia in favor of an amorphous people-to-people pillar in the rebalance, abusive authoritarian regimes sought to not only normalize their behavior toward their own citizens, but engaged in broader efforts to normalize such abusive behavior within the international system. Both the U.S. and the UN system have utterly failed to address the challenge of authoritarian rights-abusing regimes that are immune to criticism and international mechanisms. In the case of China, the UN essentially has given up on its human rights mechanisms, so it's little wonder China's neighbors view UN criticism with thinly disguised disdain. By failing to consistently and vigorously stand up for human rights and liberal values in the Asia-Pacific and within the international system, the U.S. has created an environment where authoritarians feel empowered to argue that their legal, political, and moral perspectives are equally valid or perhaps even better choices for the countries of the region and beyond. The idea that we can best support democracy and human rights in Asia by not talking about them or by casting our own values as just one option among any number of other valid choices has proven to be manifestly false. Going forward, I would like to make some suggestions on how we can craft a more realistic, yet also fundamentally idealistic, foreign policy toward the Asia-Pacific and broader Indo-Pacific region. Such an approach would benefit not only U.S. interests over the long term, but would also support a firmer foundation for regional peace and security. We should start any deliberation on our policy choices from the premise that our values are our interests, When faced with competing policy choices, the one that adheres most closely to our values should be weighted accordingly. I'd also note that free trade works best with free nations. Economic freedom should be a two-way street, and that is impossible when one partner is an authoritarian government. And many of the points that Derek has raised relate directly to this premise. Our alliances need to move beyond the hub and spokes system to become truly networked in a way that revolves less around the U.S. and is more based on the reality of regional peace and security needs. Diplomacy has got to stop meaning that we pretend some unpleasant situation will just go away on its own or get better if we ignore it, or use misleading euphemisms to discuss it with our partners. The U.S. Foreign Service and our governance and democracy assistance programs need root and branch reforms to deal with this new reality. Finally, I would add that we need to have Congress reassert itself as a strong voice in support of human rights and democratic values in U.S. foreign policy. Several recent policy errors in Asia might have been avoided entirely if the administration had treated Congress in a less high-handed fashion and genuinely consulted with its members and staff before making policy decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lin.
Thank you, Chairman Salmon, and thank you to the other members of the committee. I'd also like to submit written testimony. The Obama administration's pivot to Asia was a grave mistake. I say this not because I believe we can ignore Chinese provocations in Asia. We cannot, either in the South China Sea or the East China Sea or anywhere else. The pivot was a mistake because it focused mainly on countering military power with military power, but ignored the complex set of threats posed by China's use of trade power. China is a mercantilist nation that wields many political and economic tools to concentrate control over industrial capacity. Chinese leaders do so to provide jobs for their people and to concentrate more money, hence more power, in their hands. They do so also to be able to exert influence over nations that depend on that capacity, including the United States. Over the last 5 years, the Obama administration did nothing to address growing U.S. dependence on China for goods that Americans need every day, things like drugs, chemicals, and electronics. On the contrary, the administration proposed a trade deal, the TPP, that if approved, would only have shifted certain vital industrial capacity further into Chinese control. Extreme concentration in China of vital industrial capacity exposes the United States to coercion by China and may actually increase the likelihood of conflict by tempting Chinese leaders to take risks they would not otherwise take. Extreme concentration of industrial capacity by creating numerous single sources of supply also raises the danger of cascading industrial crashes, much like the ones that crippled world production after the great Japanese earthquake of 2011. Liberal trade has served the U.S. interest in many ways since the Second World War. But in recent years, the uncontrolled shifting of jobs from the United States overseas has harmed millions of Americans. During this period, our national trade deficit has piled up dangerous levels of debt and has provided Chinese leaders with cash they can use to increase China's influence in the world and to reduce America's. But to understand the full extent of the danger posed by the radical shift in trade policy in the mid-1990s, we must look also at the structure of supply chains. We should study what exactly is made in China and how much of any vital good comes from China. Looking at supply chains is what allows us to map our vulnerabilities in a time of conflict and a way to judge whether the pivot to Asia was well designed. 20 years ago, the United States depended on China for nothing that we needed day to day. But the U.S. embrace of WTO post-national trade policy in the 1990s freed China, often in alliance with large U.S. corporations, to use trade power to consolidate control over many assembly activities and industrial components. This includes the basic ingredients for some of the nation's most important drugs, including antibiotics, and some of the most vital inputs in our industrial food system, such as ascorbic acid. Given that private corporations often run their supply chains on a just-in-time basis in which goods are produced only as fast as they are consumed, there are often no backup supplies anywhere. The United States has long been in the practice of applying trade sanctions to other nations to achieve political ends. This includes, in recent years, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. These sanctions are often highly effective. In 1956, the United States used trade sanctions to force Britain and France to pull their military forces out of Egypt after they attempted to seize the Suez Canal. The extreme concentration of industrial capacities in China give leaders in Beijing the ability to impose similar sanctions on the United States in the event of an actual conflict, or even in the run-up to a potential conflict. What would the United States do in the event of such a cutoff of vital supplies? Would we try to tough it out? Would we cede to China's demands? Would we escalate through the use of cyber and military power? How would the public react? In every case, we have no idea what the answer might be, as it appears that no agency of the U.S. government has studied in any depth whatsoever the issue of U.S. industrial dependence on China. Liberal U.S. trade policy in the half-century to the mid-1990s helped provide the foundation for a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity and stability in the world. It is now clear that the extreme changes to U.S. trade policy in the 1990s upset those balances, in large part by paralyzing the United States' ability to counter the mercantilist policies of China and thereby to prevent a dangerous concentration of capacity, control, and power. Rather than waste more time on the TPP or to attempt to treat a trade problem with military power, as we are largely doing with the pivot, the U.S. government must figure out how to lessen our extreme and growing dependence on industrial capacity located inside China in ways that would make our nation, and indeed the world as a whole, more politically and economically secure. Thank you.
Thank you. When I first came to Congress in 1995, Warren Christopher was the Secretary of State, and I was on this Foreign Affairs Committee, brand new member, and having done a lot of things in China and Taiwan. I've been a missionary for the Mormon Church in Taiwan, same time John Huntsman was, back in 1977 to 79. So I remember asking the question of Mr. Christopher, Secretary Christopher, what is our policy toward China? And he said, well, it is strategic ambiguity. I listened to that, and I tried to understand it, and I guess I came up with the idea is we basically just say that if you do something, we're not sure what we're going to do, but we'll let you know afterward. That's never worked in any other relationship I've ever had. I don't know why we think it works with China, but it has been the policy of multiple administrations to practice strategic ambiguity. Dr. Ellings, you said that we needed more clarity. Where can we be more clear in things? And has strategic ambiguity served us well?
I remember a Herb Block cartoon when Christopher, I'm giving away, I guess, our mutual ages here. But in any case, when right after his first trip to China, there was a Herb Block cartoon in which Christopher was sitting before the president reporting, and his head was in his lap. China had basically eaten his shorts. But in any case, you might not be surprised that I think we have a lot of specific things to do. I would start, number one, our credibility is everything. We need to rebalance truly, which means end sequestration and make the investments we need to make appropriate to the challenges. We've not done a strategic assessment that's realistic, and we need one. Credibility, as I said, is everything. We've got to work so hard with our allies and win their unambiguous alignment with us. I think also we have to do something, once we do this strategic assessment, there are very specific things. Is it UUVs, UAVs, more subs? We have to invest in these things. Burden sharing, frankly, has been raised by the president-elect. It's not unreasonable. I think our allies understand their common interests with us. I think as we define new things ahead, the burden sharing can proceed. And number one, of anything else, I would put in THAAD and anything else we need with regard to North Korea and simply tell China, we're going to do this until you figure out that it's in your interest to end your support of their nuclear program. Only China has that capacity, and we got to get THAAD in there and whatever else. It's the first leverage we'll have really had. And so I'm a huge, huge supporter of that. I can go on, but anyway, on the military side, that's what I
I actually share your enthusiasm for that, and one of my concerns is with some of the political problems that President Park is facing in South Korea, that it might jeopardize our deployment plans. I hope not. I hope this is something that the new administration really pushes, because we've done nothing to properly motivate China, who is the 800-pound gorilla in those six-party talks with North Korea. North Korea has an overdependence on them for energy and food, and they could make the difference, but they've been unwilling to so far. And I think THAAD motivates them in the right direction.
Yeah, I totally agree with your concern about the situation domestically in South Korea as jeopardizing that deployment. So we need a plan B. We need the deployment. If it's not on the peninsula, then where's it going to be? It's our only source of leverage, and frankly, we have to defend our allies. We will not be credible. This is a real threat. It's not, theoretical. It's not down the road. It is the kind of poster child of the failure of the pivot.
Ms. Curie, you talked a little bit about human rights. I remember when I first came to Congress, one of the raging debates was every June we had Jackson Vanik, where we would debate most favored nation trading status for China, and every year it was kind of the same thing. And I remember when we had the push for PNTR, permanent normal trade relations with China, and I think I had a private debate with Mr. Rohrbacher, and I remember saying to him that if we passed PNTR, that we would see, because of constructive engagement, we would see phenomenal improvements in human rights and the like. I had just attended, not long before that debate, the handover ceremony for Hong Kong, and I predicted that that would be a smooth transition. It really would be one country, two systems. And Mr. Rohrbacher, I'm going to say to you right now with egg all over my face, I was wrong. Those changes didn't materialize. They did for a time. Under President Jiang Zemin, I think that he carried on a lot of the visions of Deng Xiaoping, and I think that he moved in the right direction. But the two presidents subsequent to him moved back the other way, and they increased their iron grip on the people and reversed, I think, some very positive human rights improvements. And so I'd ask you, Ms. Curie, how can, without maybe putting Jackson Vanik back in place, I'm not sure whether that's even possible, how can we do an adequate job focusing on the issues of Hong Kong and their self-determination and human rights abuses and all the other things that we really care about? How can we do that effectively?
Well, I was a young congressional staffer during those discussions, and staffed one of your colleagues, Congressman John Porter, who joined you on that trip for the handover and engaged in these frequent discussions with Mr. Rohrbacher and with you at that time. And there was a lot of genuine soul searching, and I think on both sides. I think that there was good faith, belief on both sides, both against PNTR and in favor of it, that, there were many people who genuinely thought that their view on that was the way to improve the situation in Hong Kong. I have recently had a number of conversations with a friend of mine, Jim Mann, who wrote a wonderful book about 10 years ago called The China Fantasy, that kind of talked about how we all wanted to believe that economic liberalization would bring political liberalization in China. I think that there was it comports with our values and with our ideas about how our own country is set up, and with just kind of instinctively appealed to people. Unfortunately, we then didn't follow up by doing any of the things that could have actually made that a reality, and that the opposite has happened, that the economic liberalization has strengthened the regime by giving it more tools for repression, and made it more powerful and more influential in the world. And now we have to deal with that reality. But the tools actually remain essentially the same going forward. First of all, I think one of the, like I was saying before about the pivot, one of the fundamental mistakes was that we, and my colleagues sort of alluded to this here, we tried to compete in the region in areas that are strengths for Beijing and relative weaknesses for us. For instance, on the economic playing field, and trying to, to try to displace China as an economic partner in the region somewhat. Whereas, these things may or may not, we can argue about the relative strength of the U.S. and China in economics and military in the region. But one place where we clearly have an advantage over Beijing is on our values and our ideas. And yet, we abandoned that playing field for the past 8 years. We just left it there and didn't do anything. And what's remarkable when you travel around the region and get outside of China, within China, we just have to kind of set it on the side for now, but our ideals, even when we fall short of them ourselves, and I'm talking about human rights and democracy, are far more attractive to the people of the region than Beijing's authoritarian ideals, which are only attractive to other authoritarians. And when we stop talking about those ideas, when we stop defending the liberal international order, people notice, and it has an effect on them and their willingness to defend those ideas also. And this goes to trade, it goes to human rights, it goes to a whole host of issues that then make the whole problem harder for us and open more doors for Beijing to have more influence in more countries in the region. So I think that, kind of first principles, we've got to get back to proudly saying, yes, the United States believes in these ideas, and even when we don't always live up to our ideals, they are still our ideals, and we are willing to defend them and fight for them, not just rhetorically, but by other means as necessary, and that's where the resources that Dr. Ellings talks about come in, and being able to back up our commitments to our allies, privileging relationships with allies that share our values, privileging not just military alliance relationships, but also trade relationships with those who share our values, and which then are also easier because we have shared platforms for understanding how to get along with each other and trade with each other, and then backing those up with real meaningful things, and having consequences on the other side for those who don't share our values.
Thank you very much. I'll recognize Mr. Barra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I look back on the last 8 years, there are some areas that I think have been pretty successful. Obviously, I'm a firm believer in the pivot to Asia. I do think we can look at kind of the renewed vigor in the U.S.-India relationship as an area of opportunity, not necessarily a straight shot, but clearly where we are today compared to where we were 8 years ago, the opportunities. Some of the reforms. Some of this is on the Indian side with the ascendancy of Prime Minister Modi and some of the reforms he's trying to make domestically. But that is clearly an area that I do think we've had some success. That said, it's a region fraught with challenge, and I know many of us sit with an open mind with the incoming administration, and very open to how they will approach the region. But they're going to have to hit the ground running. I mean, we've talked a lot about China. We've touched on the complexity in North Korea, the internal challenges that are facing Korea as they address some of their political turbulence. We look at a new administration in the Philippines. We've still got major unresolved issues in the South China Sea and how we approach that from a position of strength. And that is an area that I've disagreed with the administration on. I think it is much more difficult for us to resolve the South China Sea today than had we approached it much more aggressively a year, 2 years ago. That said, we are where we are. And going forward, I think there are a couple things that we have to do. The panels touched on the importance of reassuring our allies about our commitment to the region. Our economic commitment, our diplomatic commitment, the commitment of our military assets as well. I think it is very important not to be ambiguous about our commitments to our allies, but to be very clear that we are there with them. We have to understand that it's going to be a shared commitment of countries with similar sets of democratic values. Countries like Australia, New Zealand, et cetera, that it won't be the United States in this commitment by themselves. It'll be a shared commitment. We also have to be the TPP is where it's at. As someone who supported the president's ability to go out and negotiate the deal, we are where we are. So there was a lot of rhetoric on the campaign trail on both sides. I think we have to explain the benefits of opening up global markets to our own domestic community first, to our workers, and make sure as we're negotiating these deals and moving forward that we are explaining the benefits in job creation, that people are understanding that, and that everyone, from the frontline workers to the shareholders are benefiting equally from opening up these markets. But the reality is we can't withdraw and have an isolationist policy. These are the fastest growing markets in the world. On a fair playing field, I will put U.S. companies and U.S. workers up against anyone. The criticism of prior deals and perhaps even TPP is we weren't always on a fair playing field. And that was fine maybe in the 20th century when we could be a bit more benevolent. We could allow countries like Japan and others to rebuild. But we are in a competitive global environment now. We have to make sure the deals that we're negotiating are fair and balanced, not just for the countries we're trading with, but for our own workers. I've taken up a lot of my time without asking a question. Maybe Dr. Scissors, you talked about the danger of having an isolationist trade policy, and maybe if you could just touch on some of that for our own domestic population, why that would be this would be a bad time to withdraw from the world.
Well, I'll try to do so quickly. I think, and also because you touched on part of this, these are the fastest growing economies in the world. India, the Philippines is probably number one now. India, because of recent internal steps, is probably going to be number two. Vietnam is there as well. Indonesia is a little lower, but it's also 250 million people. That's a nice market. If we want opportunities for our workers beyond the American market's the most important in the world, but if we want to add to that, the Asia Pacific is where it's at, and I think everybody on this committee understands that. So I think what you want to say is use some of the language that people have used so far, which is to say how many, a billion more consumers. You have 350 million consumers in the US. You have 3 times that many more that you could add. Get people some idea of what's out there. But, and this is where we haven't succeeded, couple that with, these are the concrete steps we're actually going to take advantage of it. So I'm picking on the Obama administration a little bit here because I'm trying to make a larger point, which is, when you talk about markets and you talk about dynamism, you then don't go back to talking about diplomacy and strategic gains. That doesn't deliver gains to American workers. You have to say what's in the agreement is not a rule that we make instead of China. What's in the agreement is rules that open our markets and get us the following benefits. And I think what's missing and what might be easier, as we've discussed here and has been discussed in the campaign, it might be easier to do this bilaterally. It was a really difficult undertaking the Obama administration went to, bringing such disparate countries together. Japan, Vietnam, Canada, Peru. I mean, this is really hard. And so maybe the way to do this, both in terms of the success, the solidity of the agreement, and the communication, is to say, look, let's simplify it. This is one country. It's growing rapidly. It has a lot of people. There's a lot of opportunities for us. And this is concretely how we're going to do it. I do not, as I said, fault the Obama administration at all for trying TPP. For the country standpoint, we need to learn why it didn't work, why both major presidential candidates opposed it. And my response is we couldn't deliver concrete economic benefits. If we do this bilaterally, we can't necessarily have the giant benefits you're talking about, but step by step, start with one bilateral agreement, add another. Who wants to negotiate with us first? As Kelly said, who are our best partners in terms of values? I think we can go back and say, look, each of these agreements are with good partners that have created opportunities. Each step may be small, but we're heading towards the Asia Pacific being open, all that the potential benefit that everyone here sees.
Great.
Thank you. Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to miss you. Hope things go well in Arizona. Recently, President-elect Donald Trump had a telephone conversation with President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan, and many in the news media and diplomatic community went apoplectic. I'd like for you to please share your view on whether Donald Trump's
phone call with the Taiwan president was wise or unwise, advanced or retreated the interests of America? And I'll just work my way across. Dr. Ellings?
Sure. I'm very, very pleased to answer that question. As you say, it's been I think, basically a tempest in a teapot, but yeah, there's been a lot of hot air and so on expended on this. First of all, there are strategic as well as democratic value reasons you might want to refurbish a relationship with Taiwan. China's put tremendous pressure on Taiwan. It's not in an enviable strategic position. At the same time, it's developed a remarkable democracy. I happen to be, by the way, Chairman Salmon also at Tsai Ing-wen's inauguration. There are strategic realities that strike fear in many Americans' hearts, but my view is, I think, a sober one, that this call to a still President-elect Trump is strategically useful, justified. There's no reason we can't have conversations while in the meantime China can act so aggressively and feel impervious to these kinds of things.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ellings. And I'm going to work around a little bit. Each of you have about a minute, but the folks on my right haven't had much time. So I'm going to go to Mr. Lin, then Ms. Curry, then to Dr. Scissors. Mr. Lin?
No, I basically agree that the President-elect Trump's taking of that phone call was probably a good thing. And, one of the things that all of these nations in that region have not been talking about, but need to talk about, is the fact that all of their industrial systems are so entirely interdependent. I mean, for the same reason that it's dangerous for the United States for the Obama administration to pretend that there might be a military solution in the South China Sea or the East China Sea, it's just as dangerous for the Chinese to believe that there's a military solution vis-a-vis Taiwan. Any military action in that zone by the United States, by the Japanese, by the Chinese, will create an immediate disruption of supply systems on which we all depend, and will, within a matter of days, seize up the entire world industrial system.
All right, Mr. Lin, thank you for your insight. I'm trying to reserve some time for Ms. Curry and Dr. Scissors. Ms. Curry?
Thank you. I think it was both the right thing to do and a smart thing to do for the reasons that my colleagues have indicated. And also because, one of the things that drives me the most crazy as a former State Department employee is the tendency we have to use euphemisms and construct these word scaffolds around what we do that don't have any connection to reality. And with a single phone call, President-elect Trump and Tsai Ing-wen together, she had agency in this, which is another thing that people seem to completely miss, that she was the other party on the other end of the phone call who made a decision to do this as well. That, they kind of blew that up a little bit, and that was very well done and warranted, I think.
Thank you. Dr. Scissors?
I'll be brief. I don't really care about the phone call. What I want to see is what U.S.-Taiwan relations are going to look like in a Trump administration. If the phone call says the Trump administration is going to be more active in talking to Taiwan about issues in the South China Sea, about arms sales, about what I would like to talk about, which is improving economic relationship, that's fantastic. Then it's a great idea. If it's just something that occurred while he's still a private citizen and we don't act with the Taiwanese, then it doesn't mean and it doesn't add up to anything. I would even say I'm perfectly happy talking to the mainland while we're talking to Taiwan. They want to be involved in the conversation? Fine. As long as the U.S. is talking to Taiwan, figuring out where we can cooperate more, that's what matters. If this was the first step, great.
All right, thank you for your insight.
Thank you. Ms. Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to keep my question brief because I'd like to hear your responses, but my question is about North Korea. I represent Hawaii. We're in the middle of the Pacific and within range of North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missiles, and obviously the continued progress that they make in miniaturizing their nuclear weapons is deeply, deeply concerning. Everyone talks about how essential China is to the denuclearization of North Korea, but very few people have any concrete ideas on exactly how to get China to take action, to actually change the dynamic here. So if each of you could just comment briefly on that question and taking into account what's happening on the peninsula and the relationship between the peninsula, Japan, and China and us.
Shall I start? Thank you so much. Well, you've just kind of asked me to talk about my favorite subject. I've been writing and thinking about this literally for 30 years. And so I think it boils down to this. By the way, I live in Seattle. And Seattle, also in those concentric rings, has JBLM, which are forces to reinforce the peninsula. The Bangor Trident Missile Base, we're just like you, a #1 target. So I feel it personally. My view, as I stated earlier, is that the clearest thing we can do, and which the Chinese have obviously signaled they would like us least to do, is get THAAD into South Korea, and I would put in a broader anti-missile system combining Japan, at sea, on the peninsula. We expressed earlier concern that President Pak's difficulties put at risk our ability, perhaps next year, to deploy THAAD there. That is a terrible development. I do worry about that. So we have to have plan B and C here. But we've got to do it, and I'll tell you, having learned from the INF issue and what we did in the early 1980s, and that's something I think we all need to study here. If we had a robust anti-missile system in Northeast Asia, I think China would do what's necessary to denuclearize the North.
I don't mean to avoid your question, but it's security, so I'm going to yield to my colleagues.
I would add a couple things. Go after the palace economy more vigorously. We have not implemented all the sanctions, the economic sanctions tools that we have at our disposal to go after North Korea's palace economy and hold the Chinese to account for their role in propping up the palace economy that surrounds Kim Jong-un and the people around him, and allow them to live in a lifestyle that is completely attenuated from the way that the rest of the North Korean people live. So there are many things that we can do to make them more uncomfortable and put pressure on the regime in that way. And the Chinese don't like it, but again, as Dr. Elling says, we need to just tell them, look, this is what we're going to do. You aren't being helpful, and so we're taking these things into our own hands. And then the other thing that I would do is throw everything we have diplomatically, politically, that we can behind the UN's Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in North Korea, because that inquiry has gotten under the skin of the Kim regime in a major way. They really don't like being brought up in the UN on human rights charges in this way, and it really bothers them. And I don't think, have fully explored the limits of how we can take advantage of that process. The Chinese also don't like having to defend them at the UN and having to expend diplomatic capital on the North Koreans at the UN on human rights.
Thank you.
Just adding to what Ms. Curry said, supply lines matter. And one of the ways to exert pressure upon the North Koreans is to really push the Chinese to become serious about putting pressure on the North Koreans. As we may remember in the run-up to the Iraq War, North Korea was acting in an extremely belligerent way, and there was a sense they might have taken advantage of the focus of the U.S. military in the Middle East to engage in some kind of action in their area. And the Chinese, what they did is they cut off the supplies of a number of goods into North Korea, and that brought the North Koreans to heel.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just wonder if I could just add something here that I think is really important. I think no pressure directly on North Korea will work. Direct pressure on North Korea, no matter how we've done it, their regime requires the nuclear weapon. And so there's no way direct pressure without pressure on China is going to work. And China's interests, if we don't put enough pressure on China, China's interests are in North Korea as a buffer And as North Korea as an irritant to us, it pins our troops down, it keeps our attention. If there's a war, it's another front. So North Korea is a core interest of China. And so what we have to make clear to China is we understand it's a core interest, but its nuclearization is our core interest.
You know, it's interesting. They say that the reason they're hesitant to jump in and do what needs to be done is that it would destabilize North Korea, and there'd be this onslaught of refugees coming across the North Korean border into China. I think the real reason is that they fear one Korea. They fear a unified Korea, and they fear an increased U.S. presence on the peninsula. So I think that's what the real issues are. And so I think that the provocative answers that have been given about motivating China are real, and they would work. One of the things I've been pushing for the last year is the deployment of THAAD. And I think, as you said, Dr. Ellings, that increasing that to possibly Japan as well, and other ballistic defense systems is absolutely imperative. China is not going to care unless you make them care, and they're not going to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. They're only going to do it if they feel compelled to do it, because not doing it costs more than doing it. That's what the answer is. Mr. Rohrabacher. Oh, have I missed you? I am so sorry, Mr. Perry, General Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doing, as always, a fabulous job. I'm thinking about the conversation initially, strategic ambiguity, and I'm just wondering in what appears to be with the President-elect's propensity for unpredictability. You know, strategic ambiguity in the sense that it was described by the chairman was essentially we didn't know what the heck we were doing. But when you want to be ambiguous, knowing that you want to be, that can probably be a strength, right? So my question is, are there specific conditions that we should articulate that's like a floor or a ceiling with China, and then remain ambiguous about some other things where maybe we maintain some flexibility to get them to head where we want to go? And I just want to. I'd like to actually start with you, Mr. Lin. What are your thoughts on that? Are there some specific things that we should articulate, and what would they be?
Well, one of the things that we absolutely want to articulate is that to increase the security of both the United States and China, to increase the security of all the nations in the region and indeed of the world, we want to reduce the number of cases in which all of key components are located in China. And that's going to require the cooperation of the Chinese. When you have all of a certain kind of chemical industry built up in China, the Chinese can do a lot to prevent us from moving any of that capacity abroad. We think of industrial activity as something that moves around. That's not the case. But it is in everybody's interest that industrial capacity be much more widespread. It creates a resilient system, and it means that when mistakes are made, as they will inevitably be made in human society, bad things are less bad.
Curry.
Well, I'll talk about something that we continually articulate as kind of a floor in the region with China, which is our statement that we will not accept China changing the status quo on Taiwan or changing the status or militarizing the South China Sea by doing these things by force or coercion. And we make these statements all the time, but then we don't actually do anything to back them up. So I think we have floors. I think we've articulated them over time, but the Chinese don't actually see them as floors. It's not the problem that we don't have floors, it's just that they're very holy and not very stable and not very sturdy and not viewed by the Chinese as meaningful. And so I think, again, being consistent, being public about what these basic things are is one thing, but then having meaningful consequences when the Chinese start to push on them and stomp on them and try to poke holes in them, and making sure that we are doing things to push back. And whether it is strengthening Taiwan's defenses, deploying THAAD, being more active in our regional diplomacy within ASEAN about the South China Sea issues to push back on the salami slicing tactics, negotiating more bilateral investment treaties, more bilateral trade agreements to encircle China with more open economic freedom. Any of and all of these things, you know, it's not an either or.
Do you think that our inability, as maybe you described it, and so if I'm describing it incorrectly, let me know, but our inability to stand firm on the on how we articulate the barriers or the constraints that we have, is that a function of our governance, our form of governance, that we say one thing but we have a hard time? It requires legislation. It's not something the executive can do unilaterally. Was that what the deal is, or is it or just we talk big but then we don't follow through?
I think it's the latter. We have all the legislative tools in place. You have the Taiwan Relations Act, you have the Tibet Policy Act, you have a raft of legislative pieces over the history of the past 25 years.
So it would be your opinion that the executive can make all the difference in this instance?
I think forceful leadership that's principled and consistent and actually has a plan for when things don't work out according to the fiction they've created in their head.
Dr. Scissors?
Yeah, I have two specific answers, and one is I think we've already provided the ceiling. America's commitment to open markets has helped, not been the main thing, but it has helped raise hundreds of millions of Chinese out of poverty. We have played our role in helping China's development for the past 35 years. So I don't think whatever we do going forward, anyone can doubt that the U.S. has tried to accommodate China and done well for the Chinese people in our policies to now. Where I would put the floor is to enforce American law. The Chinese steal intellectual property. They're breaking our law. I'll give you a small case, but one that infuriated me. We had a federal court a few months ago say that Chinese vitamin C makers can violate U.S. antitrust law, but they were told by the Chinese government to do it, so they have sovereign immunity. That's outrageous. I'm not a lawyer. I have no idea about the legal foundations of the decision. I'm saying as a matter of policy, so the Chinese government can tell Chinese companies to break U.S. law and it's okay. I think our credibility on accommodating China to this point has extremely high. I can't imagine another country that would have run the global economy the way we did that would have helped the Chinese. And the floor comes from, we have laws, you have to obey them, and I don't want to hear excuses about the government told you or not.
Quickly, Dr. Ellings, with the chair's indulgence.
Yeah, two quick comments on the question of IP theft. The Congress and the President signed the bill, provided the power to respond with all the powers that the President has to stop terrorists in using the banking system and so on. The President has the power to stop IP thieves overseas and has not done it, so we have no credibility. Number two, this is really kind of the most important, I think, strategic point to make. Ambiguity is never what you want to have in a strategic situation, ever, unless you're forced into it out of weakness. And so what my concern is, since we have not decided on a military strategy in Asia, we have not figured out what, in my view, is a plan to show unambiguously that with our allies, we can win a battle in the commons without striking China directly. That's credible. If we have to strike China directly, then we're raising the specter of them striking back at our homeland. So we need unambiguous capacity to win over the commons, and that is the critical strategic issue facing us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rohrbacher.
This ambiguity stuff, I'll tell you that, let's face it, when they talk about ambiguity, what they really mean is they don't know what the hell they're going to do. And it's not, we don't know what our reaction, or we have a reaction that we don't want the enemy to know. We don't know. And I've been saying that for a number of years, and no one has ever come forward and say, well, let me tell you the secret plan. And no one ever has done that. It's fitting for the last hearing of this subcommittee that we note one thing, that we have been talking about the Pacific today, and very little reference has been made to Japan. And Japan is the most important player in the region. And Japan, if there's going to be peace and prosperity, the United States has got to maintain its incredibly positive relation with Japan. And let us not end this hearing without reaffirming that. And let me just note, and how could we actually send messages then in terms to China or North Korea? Well, I bet if we decided to aggressively and publicly support the rearming of Japan and the reintroducing of the Japanese Navy into the Pacific, rather than putting that entire burden on the American taxpayers, I think that there would be a message there. And it would be a message they would pay attention to. So basically, perhaps as well, when the Chinese start stealing all of our technology, maybe then we could go to Japan and have a very open and, how do you say, mutually beneficial treaty that would then show that these other people are being left out, because the Japanese are playing honestly with us now and are trying their very best to be good friends. So recognizing the role of Japan, I think, is essential when we try to plot out what's going on in the future. Mr. Scissors, I certainly agree with you totally about the TPP, and let me just ask you whether or not you have looked at the patent section of the TPP. I was told over and again, oh no, there's nothing in there that would change patent law in the United States. Is it still in there, the provision that eventually I saw there, that said that we will endeavor to change our patent law, which right now means that when our inventor files for a patent, that patent is secret until that patent application is secret till it's issued, till the patent is issued. The TPP that I read said we will endeavor to change that rule, and after 18 months, we're going to publish for the whole world to see patent applications even before the patent's been granted, which I would label the Steal American Technologies proposal. Is it still in there?
Well, so the answer, there's an overarching answer, which is the Congress can always override our trade agreements. There's a clause in all of our trade agreements that says this shall not infringe on the Congress's ability. Now, I think this is still a real issue. If the default changes, if the Congress must do something to change American law to a certain area instead of just do nothing, that has an impact on the U.S. I think the big issue in data protection is most of our partners in the TPP and around the world don't protect data in exactly the way you're talking about, the way we would like, and the TPP doesn't solve that problem. And I don't want it to set a precedent of not solving the problem going forward.
Well, let me accept that, but let me also accept that anybody, and because I fought, as my colleagues know, I have fought these efforts by multinational U.S. corporations to change the patent law for the last 25 years. And one of the first fights I was in was to make sure that American inventors wouldn't have to publish their patent applications until they got their patent issued. And we won that here, and I see no reason for it to be in the TPP whatsoever. In terms of what we need to do in terms of China and such, and thank you very much for noting that over these years I have actually been very aggressive in talking about predicting what would happen is if we would treat China as if it was any other democratic state. Japan has a great democracy. They protect people's rights. China doesn't do any of that. But yet at times we end up with trade policies and treating China better than we do Japan. How ridiculous is that? And what has it resulted? It was resulted in, and because, again, others were making the argument, and thank you for acknowledging that if we just really treat China well, they're going to come out and be friendly to us, and they're going to become liberals, you know? And I call that the hug a Nazi, make a liberal theory, which has been disproven over and over again. And so I think that what we're doing now is we have to be very realistic. I think we have a new president that is basically not going to be seen as someone as a faint-hearted leader. This is not what Donald Trump is going to be. He's going to be a strong leader. He's also going to appreciate friends. little simple things like that. And like, if it's not in the interest of the American people specifically, I'm not going to do it. These are simple principles, but but basically they are pragmatic moves by a person of principle, but a principle of courage as well. So I'm actually very optimistic. Where I remember when everybody went crazy over this Taiwan phone call, I was saying that's sending the exact message to Beijing that we want to send them. We're no longer a bunch of pushovers here. We got people, we got a strong leader, and we're going to make sure that the world is a safer place and that the gangsters and dictators of this world better understand that. And so with that said, one of the other things that has made this a safer world is the hard work of people like you, Mr. Chairman. And we are all very grateful, and I am very pleased now to be the last witness before you take off. We started well over 20 years ago. We have, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here. I don't know where I'm going to be, but may end up surfing in California and just drinking tequila for the rest of my life. Who knows? But the fact is that the two of us started out a long time ago, and you have done a great job for our country. And I know this isn't the end of it. This is the end of this phase of that. So thank you very much. God bless you. There we go.
Well, let me just say that in many ways this last hearing for me was very cathartic. I kind of started out my China experience as a missionary in 1977 to Taiwan, and I was there for 2 years. I was there when Jimmy Carter severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan, and I remember the reaction of the people there. I remember my heart being broken at the time because I grew to love and respect the people on Taiwan so very much. And in that time, since then, they've gone from an autocratic regime to a thriving democracy. At the time, it was Chiang Kai-shek's son that was the president of Taiwan, and there weren't freely held elections. Since that time, they've become one of the most robust democracies in the entire world. And I was there at the swearing in for Lee Teng-hui, and I remember at the time China lobbing missiles in the Taiwan Strait with our policy of strategic ambiguity. It was frustrating. It was very, very frustrating. But to be able to have a panel of experts such as yourself sit there and talk about credible, thoughtful solutions to moving forward and making that region of the world a prosperous place and a unified place, it was very cathartic for me. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. This committee hearing was planned long before the infamous phone call over the weekend, but to hear virtually everybody on the panel say it was a good idea, it was a good thing, or it can be a good thing if the policy moves in the right direction, I think is a good message, and I hope that the press corps in this country is picking up on it, because I don't think there are people who are any more talented in their expertise on China. In fact, probably most far beneath your realm. So thank you for your great ideas and your thoughts and your comments, and I greatly appreciate it. And with that, this committee is now adjourned.